a very well-renowned solution, is a pathway whereby a developing economy can foster the growth of a new capitalist sector. Mr. Speaker, we're talking structural change of an economy. Capital spending is associated with investment or development spending. Today, I first wish to start on the how. How these aforementioned areas, if prioritized through 2025, will improve efficiency. The government has devoted over $156 million in the 2021-2022 estimates alone to realize the construction of over 600 homes. And I commend the government on this initiative, Mr. Speaker. Housing has remained a priority for over the last 7 years. I mean, we see them, we drive, we see them in Emzol, we see them in Bellevue-Chopin. When my friend over there, sorry, Mr. Speaker.
Please remember to refer to members as honorable members.
Yes,
please.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. In La Plaine, in all of these communities. And Mr. Speaker, I am sure that one of the successive speakers may define economic development in the context of recognizing and increasing the standard of living, right? I mean, the honorable member from the Northeast mentioned standard of living yesterday. Let me draw back your attention to the moot. Prioritizing this particular development area through 2025 will allow the dream to build 5,000 homes. And Mr. Speaker, before I go on to this debate, let me ask the audience to divorce the emotions they may have on the housing spectrum and rely on your objective rationality, through my discourse. The benefit to the youth. Mr. Speaker, I am a young professional myself. And in informal dialogue with many of my colleagues, 14 of 20 could not tick off home ownership on their checklist. This is a reflection of the reality of many of our young persons. There are vast ethnic differences in the pathways and timelines for leaving the parental home. Caribbean youth sometimes never experience this privilege. Mr. Speaker, many youth do not own a home before 40, and materialistically, before 60. The bank owns it. Increased investment in housing will lend an opportunity to home ownership among many of our youth. Mr. Speaker, with the recent first-time home owner grant approved in 2020, youth under 40 have been affording an opportunity to apply for grant vouchers to a maximum of $10,000 per approved applicant, and this can be put towards purchasing construction materials, a payment of labor, property transfers fees. Mr. Speaker, I was surprised when an announcement came that not enough applicants were received, not enough applications were received, and there was a recall for the applications in 2021. Mr. Speaker, investing in housing with opportunities for youth who wish to rent to own condos, apartments. The first pillar of the government of Trinidad and Tobago's housing and urban development policy is affordability. Mr. Speaker, the rent-to-buy programs was designed to facilitate those persons who, given their current financial situation, are unable to qualify for mortgage financing, a struggle many youth face right here in Dominica. An investment in housing over the next 3 years is central to the achievement of our SDGs. Mr. Speaker, the motto of our SDGs, leave no one behind. Housing is an important component of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and an essential driver for achieving many of the Sustainable Development Goals. In fact, Target 11.1 under SDG 11 directly calls for adequate, safe, and affordable housing, providing a clarion call for adequate housing for all by 2030. Dr. Joan Close, Executive Director of the UN Settlements Program, UN Habitat, in his message of the World Habitat Day under the 2017 theme, suggests, and I quote, for housing to contribute to national socio-economic development and achievement of the SDGs, the new urban agenda calls for placing housing policies at the center of national urban policies and investments along with strategies to fight poverty, to improve health and employment. And you're telling me that you disagree, that we should not focus on housing? Harris et al. Cites that the construction and the use of decent housing affects economic development through its impact on employment, on savings, on investment, labor productivity. I mean, Mr. Speaker, I didn't really want to come here and teach economics today. I've been doing this for the last 10 years. But for an individual receiving a home, we know that rent control is something that many of us cry for in Dominica, right? Rent prices are high. And therefore, it is essential. If provided homes, it means there's going to be a multiplier effect. Savings will increase. Savings can lead to increased investments. Investments can lead to new employment opportunities, increased aggregate demand, and the chain can go on. Mr. Speaker, permit me to shift the focus of my debates to renewable energy, particularly geothermal energy. Permit me to indulge you in deepening your understanding to the how the focus over the next 3 years on geothermal energy can contribute to improving efficiency. Let's go for a time capsule, Mr. Speaker. I want to call it the geothermal capsule, if you may. Mr. Speaker, wells were drilled in 2011 and 2012 in Dominica. I'm just putting up my hands for those of us who may not necessarily understand how many years that may have been. 10 years, Mr. Speaker. Several publications have been made on geothermal project developments and its phases. In fact, a well-known publication is the Energy Sector Management Assistance Program, ESMAP, which is a geothermal handbook that provides a guideline for the project development phases ranging over a 7-year period, from the start of the preliminary studies to the start of plant operation. Well, Mr. Speaker, we are well past that time. East Africa is emerging as one of the fastest growing geothermal areas in the world. Kenya is one of the countries that has made great strides in developing its geothermal resource. Ethiopia is following a similar pattern. But Mr. Speaker, it takes 7 years to develop a geothermal resource. Contextualizing this scenario to Dominica, the resource identification stage is the longest stage in the development process. And this was identified far before being proven in 2011. No major capital expenditures have been made since then. And therefore, this is the time and the opportunity to make such capital expenditures. Mr. Speaker, let me justify the why. Mr. Speaker, are you aware of the current trading price of oil today? It was a rhetorical question, no? Oh. Well, Mr. Speaker, according to oilprice.com, which is the #1 source for oil and energy news, the current trading price is $115 a barrel. And this pandemic is teaching the critical need for having indigenous sources of production. On a visit to the site on Thursday, January 13th, 2022, the British High Commissioner to Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean, His Excellency Scott Fusserdon, stated that this is an important project for Dominica as a geothermal power plant has the potential to be a significant source of income for the country. He explained, and I quote, "This geothermal project is a really important example of that, because the potential here is not just to make this island energy dependent and to generate all your electricity from renewable sources, but there is also an amazing potential for you to generate electricity and drive your own prosperity through that very significant source of income. The expected output from this well will be above 20 megawatts of electricity, Mr. Speaker. In Dominica in 2018, peak demand was 12.9. And coupled with hydropower contributing 6.64, we are well over that. There's an excess that we can supply to our French territories, Mr. Speaker. I am talking about the euros. As the French would say it, Mr. Speaker, we all see the opportunity to earn foreign currency. I spoke about the young professionals earlier, but what about the young entrepreneurs? We care about all the entrepreneurs, but our focus today is on the youth. Mr. Speaker, the honorable member here extracting coconuts from oils, and tonight, the barber, the cosmetologist, the restaurant owner, the event planner, the pastry maker, all have to consider how their production costs are being affected by the continuous spikes in oil prices. Cost of production, Mr. Speaker, impacts the profit margins and production scale for many of our SMEs, our small and medium-sized enterprises. And electricity costs contribute to a great proportion of these variables. Well, perhaps second to customs, duties, and charges, but that's for another debate if you allow us in October, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the cost competitiveness of our small businesses will increase significantly due to reduced electricity costs once the geothermal plant is completed. Mr. Speaker, if the small businesses are bawling about costs, what about manufacturing? Sir Arthur Lewis mentions that the introduction of a capitalist sector is what contributes to development. So if we want to see more manufacturers, we need to see a decrease in production costs. I see geothermal energy transmission driving a burgeoning manufacturing sector. And as we do some introspection to increase our food security, we want to use the mangoes in wafers and the juice in bottled drinks, the bay oils in aftershave and cologne and fragrances. But Mr. Speaker, we need to see, we need indigenous sources of energy that will cut these costs. We, the youth, have many ideas, innovative ones at that, but the environment has to be attractive.
Honorable Member, you have 5 more minutes to complete your presentation.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. We, youth, have so many ideas, innovative ones at that. All we are asking for is 2 years. 2 years, Mr. Speaker, according to most published scholarly articles, not even 3, to see the construction of the geothermal plant. Mr. Speaker, we have already cited youth unemployment as a major challenge, and more recently with the increased number of student migrants, underemployment has been tossed across many of those who return. Avenues like these power plants will provide opportunities for professionals specializing as geologists, geochemists, geophysicists, hydrologists, reservoir engineers, mud loggers, hydraulical engineers. And Mr. Speaker, these are the types of specializations we need to be talking about in 2022. And when the geothermal plant is constructed and it fuels a manufacturing sector, we will have opportunities for quality technicians, for machinists, lab technicians, juice production specialists, quality control and assurance officers, vendor development, marketing managers. Mr. Speaker, it's time we start diversifying the profiles outside of law, outside of education. A lot of teachers, a lot of healthcare professionals, a lot of lawyers. Mr. Speaker, the geothermal plant, if focus is shifted for the next 3 years, will provide increased employment opportunities for return migrants. And Mr. Speaker, let me add this. Let me add that this might just spark the population increase that the Prime Minister has been citing for some time. For us to make something happen. Let's make something happen for these specialized skilled professionals. And I foresee the geothermal power plant trickling much of these benefits to the other sectors, to agriculture. Just yesterday we were debating about marijuana legalization, right? To fishing, to education, to health. In fact, Mr. Speaker, the 2021 estimates allocated over $611 million to the public works and digital economy sector, with most of the allocation to the public works, because somebody might come and say, let's build roads. Mr. Speaker, with all due respect, I too want to drive on a smooth road. I want to drive on a smooth road across the entire island. And I want access. I agree. We require a major capital expenditure. But if we want to improve efficiency, we have to apply best practices. The pothole patching practice we see from recurrent expenditures in many communities is very short term. But Mr. Speaker, still, the expenditures associated with the short-term fix are quite high based on budgetary estimates. If we really seek to be more efficient, more financially prudent for capital expenditures, the proposition should be to include this priority in the next development cycle and have the minor repairs expending out throughout the cycle through recurrent expenditures. Mr. Speaker, how many potholes have you solved on driving from the roundabout in Pokase to Marigot? How many?
I'm assuming that's another rhetorical question.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I mean, Mr. Speaker, this road was developed since 2014. Right? And yes, we've probably had to allocate recurrent expenditures to that project. Right? And perhaps we've had exogenous shocks that have caused bridges to fall. Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Honorable Member, you have 1 more minute to wrap up your
Speaker.
presentation.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to motion that the Honourable Member be given 2 additional minutes, to complete her presentation.
I wish to second the motion.
Okay, it has been moved and seconded that the Honourable Member be given an additional 2 minutes to complete her presentation. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The Honourable Member, please. The ayes have it. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So as I was saying, Mr. Speaker, the road, right? I mean, personally, this major capital road investment has had to be minimally maintained since its commissioning. And so, if we do recurrent expenditures and focus on the roads in the next development cycle, in 2025 to 2028, that would prove to be more efficient. Mr. Speaker, for a moment there, after highlighting benefits from the first 2 projects, I even forgot that I also had to focus on the debated international airports. Mr. Speaker, let's draw attention to the how. I want you to understand that all of the major capital projects we are proposing are already on the way. Our hope is that a strict focus through 2025 will contribute to their successful completion once monitored and evaluated relative to targets and objectives. Mr. Speaker, the recurrent expenditures allocated to the maintenance for public works, for roads, for bridges, to education, for maintenance, and for schools, and even the healthcare sector, to the maintenance of health centers, can continue to drive development through other sectors through 2025. But it cannot be a major capital project. It has to come from the recurrent expenditures. The international airport is the access we need for increased tourist arrivals to match the increased investments in the tourism sector through hotels. I cannot begin to explain the spillover effects through agriculture. More money for the farmers, the fishermen, to small business owners, the handcrafts, the honorable member over here, selling the oils, Mr. Speaker, the arts. Mr. Speaker, I will not allude to the salient points that my colleagues will further expound on, but I wish to reiterate that focusing on housing, geothermal energy, and the international airport for the next 3 years, providing that the government implements targets, objectives that should be measurable throughout and at the end of the development cycle to ensure efficient use of government expenditure will contribute to development, to the young, to the old, and to those of us who are in between, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The motion is now before the House for debate. Yes, I recognize Honorable Jedediah Farrell. Honorable Farrell, I'm going to ask that you move to the podium so that you can deliver your presentation from the safety of the podium.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, good morning.
I humbly ask for the privilege for me to refer to my notes, or the Bible of common sense, I should call it.
Yes, permission has been granted. You may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, what is efficiency? There are many practical definitions out there, one of the most globally accepted ones being capable of producing a desired result with little to no effort. But I decided to take a more theoretical approach to this question. As the famous book author Zig Ziglar states, and I quote, efficiency is doing things right. Effectiveness is doing the right thing. But now, that also generates the question, what is the right thing? Is it providing affordable and not free housing? Applying more emphasis on the root of the housing problem? Or is it directing our focus into other economic aspects, like agricultural exports and the manufacturing sector, sectors which can provide employment and a means of income for citizens, also revenue for the country? I would like to mention the talking point on DBS Radio sometime last week, where Honorable Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit and Honorable Minister Fidel Grant talked about an initiative to get young people together with agricultural backgrounds and degrees to cultivate high-value crops in complementary fashion to the farmers who are already established in the agricultural sector. They also went to talk about a $9.9 million contract, which has been signed and awarded towards the construction of feeder roads all over the country, something my team will touch upon later during this debate. Or, Mr. Speaker, is it authorizing government's expenditures on capital projects? Sorry, let me reiterate. Or is it, Mr. Speaker, authorizing government expenditures on capital projects for the next 3 years, Mr. Speaker, to be restricted to the housing sector, the international airport, and renewable energy in order to improve efficiency? This proposal, Mr. Speaker, even at face value, it seems implausible. But by doing my own research and having meetings with people in ministerial positions, even going on the grounds, on the battlefield, to really hear and understand what the citizens are feeling, not just older folks, but young people as well. So, Mr. Speaker, I have two sides of the coin. I can see how we plan to make this work, but just because something is working, it doesn't mean that it cannot be improved. Although investments into these sectors are positive ones, no doubt, is it in the country's best interest to devote funding solely into these three sectors, Mr. Speaker? I'm sure we are all familiar with the phrase, don't put all your eggs into one basket. Well, in this situation, there's 3 baskets. Each one of these baskets falling under respective ministry. But, Mr. Speaker, that's 3 out of 15. To put that more into perspective, that's 1 out of 5. Are we really proposing to neglect these other ministries and the sectors which fall under them? Are we proposing to neglect the Ministry of Education, of Human Resource Planning? The government has made tertiary education relatively free. Are we about to abandon this initiative? I am sure many young citizens have benefited from this program, myself included. It gave me the means to further my studies in architecture, to find my passion and to kickstart my career. What the government has done here is invest in its human capital, Mr. Speaker. And according to Investopedia.com, human capital affects economic growth and can help to develop an economy by expanding the knowledge and skill of its people. Mr. Speaker, are we going to neglect the Ministry of Public Works and the digital economy? Are we going to neglect the Ministry of Health, Wellness, and New Health Investments? Currently, the government are making allowances to begin the construction of a new health center in St. Joseph, or more functional in terms of architecture. The utilization of space, the flow of human traffic. We all know how crowded these areas tend to get, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, are we proposing to neglect the Ministry of Youth Development and Empowerment, Gender Affairs, Youth at Risk, Senior Security, and Dominicans with Disabilities? Are we going to cast these aside? I would like to place emphasis on the last ministry I stated, the Ministry of Youth and Development and Empowerment. Mr. Speaker, if I may, I would like to address my fellow parliamentarians. This is why we are here today.
Yes, you may do so, but remember, through the chair.
My apologies. This is why we are here today. Because the government did not neglect the Ministry of Youth Development and Empowerment. They saw it fit to invest in this ministry because they know just as well as we do that a country's youth is just as valuable as any other sector and has the potential to be the country's most valuable asset. My fellow parliamentarians, it is our responsibility to keep the best interests of youth in mind. The youth of the various villages, Grand Bay, Maho, St. Joseph, Kalibishi, even the Kalinago territory. Those that are studying abroad, about to return back to their mother country. We have been chosen to speak about their thoughts, their queries, their concerns, their ideas of moving the country forward. So, Mr. Speaker, are we really moving the country forward by restricting government's expenditures to these three sectors only? Directing so much of our financial resources towards providing houses, this may make citizens reliant and dependent on what is simply given to them in an economy which is becoming hard to provide for itself. I went to a few villages, St. Joseph and Salisbury, even Maho to an extent, to get some insight on what the young people are feeling, Mr. Speaker. And a lot of them opened by saying, my brother, the country had Gaza.
Translate, please. Gaza.
My apologies again.
You can either translate or withdraw.
Sorry. Gaza is a term used to speak as like another word for brother.
Thank you.
Sorry.
You may proceed.
Yeah. Many studies suggest, Mr. Speaker, that the economic pressures may also give a rise to a host of unhealthy behaviors, such as binging on sugary or high-fat comfort food. It is estimated that 38.8% of adult women and 22.9% of adult men are living with obesity in Dominica. This is sourced by the Global Nutrition Report. There are also many unhealthy practices too, like smoking and drinking. A lot of people resort to this in order to escape the worries and the concerns of life, Mr. Speaker. It has been reported by the Dominica Chinese Friendship Hospital that an increase in young people between the ages of 12 and 35 has been admitted to the psychiatric ward. Can you imagine that? 12, Mr. Speaker. These are the ages of our baby brothers and sisters, our nieces, nephews. Providing houses will benefit the country's human capital, 100%, both in the immediate sense and in long term. But if we're investing in the human capital, in social development, in social protection, let us do so in its entirety. According to a study reported on in the current issue of American Journal and of Psychiatry published by the American Psychology Association, APA, a database of 34,000 patients were examined with 2 or more psychiatric hospitalizations in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts during 1994 and 2000. Unemployment, poverty, and housing unaffordability were all correlated with a risk of mental illness. So, Mr. Speaker, I ask again, what is the right thing? Is it focusing more on the core of the housing problem, which is the inability to provide houses for oneself due to limited income, Mr. Speaker, which is correlated to mental health? There is a solution, Mr. Speaker. But the solution stems way before adulthood. As mental health issues tend to have their onset in childhood and adolescence, with the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, in their book, there states, half of mental illnesses begin by age 14. Mental illnesses such as anxiety and personality disorders. Mr. Speaker, they suggest that it is critical to intervene early to minimize the effects of development, education, employment, and health. I would like to mention the song Forward We Go by Daddy Chess and Swinging Stars, the song which was created to celebrate Dominica 50th independence. The song spoke about the harmony between citizens, the harmony between political parties, the harmony between opposing and proposing sides. So as a collective unit, let us not be hasty and take all factors into consideration before we take a step backwards. I would like to say that everything goes hand in hand, Mr. Speaker. As much as we want to direct majority of our focus into housing, we need the Ministry of Health. As much as we want to restrict expenditures towards the international airport, we need public works and the Ministry of Agriculture. Mr. Speaker, the roads are the arteries to which an economy pulses, connecting farmers and producers to their markets, our workers in both the private and public sector to their jobs. The expected large influx of people that are coming into the country because of the international airport to their destination. Mr. Speaker, as much as we would like to angle our funding towards the ventures in renewable energy, we need the Ministry of Education. According to the Government Information Service, GIS, 620 students have graduated from the Dominica State College since the government has made tertiary education free in 2019. If we seize this initiative and restrict capital expenditures to the three sectors being proposed, who are the ones going to maintain the geothermal and hydroelectric power plants? Are we going to import human resource? Are we going to strive for self-sufficiency to the point where we, the Commonwealth of Dominica, are the ones with the outstretched hand helping a sister country? Mr. Speaker, we need to diversify investments in order to make a diversified economy, a dynamic economy, if I may. So why not invest capital expenditures into more sustainable industries? According to an article published on the Dominica News Online page, written by Bod Slabert, he states that economic diversity is the process of shifting the economy away from a single income source towards multiple sources from a growing range of sectors and markets. This will encourage positive economic growth and development, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to mention my portfolio as the Shadow Minister of Finance and Investment. So it would be foolish of me not to mention trade balance in this. I would like to give you all a quick history lesson, Mr. Speaker.
Please refer to members of the House as honorable members, not
Sorry.
you all, please.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry. I would like to mention trade balance, Mr. Speaker. For the past years, Mr. Speaker, Dominica trade balance has been in the negatives. If we look back to 2016, the total export rate was 47,871 compared to the import rate of 577,541. That is a negative import rate, and it is getting worse as the years are going by. In 2017, $31,674 was received as we were exporting, and the import rate was 500.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to rise on a point of information.
Honorable member, you're rising on a point of...
Yeah.
Sorry, please state your point. What standing order are you referring to?
A point of order, point of information.
Point of information. I think you're mistaken. Yeah, I think you may be mistaken. There's no point of information. So there's a point of clarification or a point of order which refers to the standing orders of the House.
Is that correct?
No, you have to tell me which standing order you are rising.
Excuse me, Mr. Speaker. I would also like to mention that Honorable Hanif, he hasn't allowed me to yield before he spoke, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, you are indeed correct, honorable member.
Yes, I believe
So with that being said, please proceed.
Okay. In 2017, we exported, we had an export rate of 31,674. And we had an import rate of 534,674. Again, that's a negative trade balance because trade balance is export minus import. In 2018, we had an import rate of 27,851.
Point of order?
Are you standing or are you sitting on a point of order?
I am standing, but I have point of order.
And the honorable member hasn't yielded. Well.
Mr. Speaker, the honorable
On
member
what point of
has-
order are you standing?
Oh my God. I need some information on two statistics that have been pointed out.
On what point of order are you referring to?
Clarification.
No, clarification. Has he misinterpreted something that was said in your presentation that you're standing on a point of clarification for?
In his own presentation.
No. So I would
But
invite
Mr.
you.
Speaker, the honorable member is quoting numbers that are incorrect.
Yeah, honorable member, I ask you to take your seat. Thank you.
For no further delay, I would also like to say that the information I got was sourced from the Central Statistic Office of Dominica.
Honorable member, just to let you know, you have just about 1 more minute to wind up your presentation.
Okay, no problem.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to move rather that the honorable member be granted an additional 3 minutes to complete his presentation, seeing that he was interrupted.
Seconded.
It has been moved and seconded that the honorable member be given an additional 3 minutes to complete his presentation. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Honorable member, you may proceed.
So, okay. To just summarize everything, between the years 2016 to 2018, we have had a negative trade balance. I have not mentioned the years 2017 to now, because obviously, COVID. But the government, well, the senior members of government has noticed this. So this is why they have came up with the initiative of going into agricultural exports, as I mentioned earlier. So why on earth are we proposing to restrict capital expenditures and not have our export industry on this list? A negative trade balance or a trade deficiency, I should say, lowers the income of domestic workers. It also reduces the ability to save on a national level. And it also has the ability to lower or weaken the value of a currency in its country. And as a currency gets weaker, the goods become more and more expensive because the value of the goods, they do not change. But the currency is weaker, so we have to pay more money to obtain the good. There was a video circulating on Facebook, on DNO, of orange juice being priced over 50 EC dollars. Mr. Speaker, is the juice curing me from COVID? You know, going back to my first question, Mr. Speaker, what is efficiency? Mr. Speaker, I believe at the end of this debate, everyone will have a greater comprehension of efficiency, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Yes, I recognize Honorable Wendy Wallace, Minister for Finance and Investment. Honorable Wallace, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Very large shoes to fill indeed. Wendy Wallace, Minister of Finance and Investment on the proposing team. Mr. Speaker, members of this honorable House, I see we have friends and families of the youth parliamentarians, listening audience. Greetings to all. Mr. Speaker, before I proceed in support of the resolution, may I humbly ask your leave to refer to my notes?
Yes, permission is granted. You may proceed.
Much obliged, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and I'm hoping I'm getting extra time because I want to address certain things in the honorable member's presentation. First of all, Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure on which battlefield he fought on. I'm hoping it's not in Ukraine. But this battlefield that I'm fighting on right now is for the youths of the Commonwealth of Dominica. Mr. Speaker, in prioritizing what is absolutely essential, the immediate task will be to confront head-on the dire economic circumstances we have inbred from the ravages of Hurricane Maria and the pandemic that left us to gaze only into the eyes of each other. Now, Mr. Speaker, the ambit of my contribution will reflect the current vision of the Ministry of Finance and Investment which is to achieve a dynamic, resilient, sustainable, and transformed economy by 2025. Now, Mr. Speaker, some of us may not all understand the intricacies of macroeconomics, but I am hoping that our astute, rational, common sense of everyday realities will tell us that when push comes to shove, we will know what it is we need to prioritize. Mr. Speaker, the honorable member mentioned that the country's youth is the most important sector. Here's the sectors which are important for the country's youth. I will address the first priority area, housing. The key to building economic is really by establishing an effective financial management and macroeconomic framework. And let me just make reference to Oxford Economics in 2010, an assessment that they did. They reviewed evidence based on housing and the linkage between economic productivity. Yes? So, and part and parcel of that report, allow me to quote, achieving a more responsive long-term housing supply can play a major role in helping people meet their demands and asset-owning aspirations, as well as helping deliver macroeconomic stability and more flexible labor markets. Now, Mr. Speaker, economics is not for everyone. Ms. Honorable McDougall, it's for her, but with my legal background, it's complex, I must admit. But one of the basics in economics, Mr. Speaker, is that having a decent infrastructure is used as a yardstick, as a barometer for, to help guide and to help promote economic prosperity and the well-being of communities. And put simply, if youths are left to reside in poor quality, less desirable housing stock, what's going to happen? They face life chances and health costs. With the poor quality stock itself. This is when survival mode activates. Mr. Speaker, may I draw your attention to Maslow's hierarchy of needs? And to those of us who may not know that Maslow's hierarchy of needs have clothing, shelter, food. These three things take precedence. If the youths of this country are left in a calamity where they are unable to comfortably reside in resilient, sustainable homes, constantly harassed by climate pressures, which will triple in intensity over the next few years, of course they will be concerned about their basic needs. They will always be in survival mode and unable to focus on efficiency. Now, Mr. Speaker, this is not economics, This is basic common sense. The need to address the housing sector by 2025 will avoid setting us back 20 years plus. Not if now, when strikes. And Mr. Speaker, permit me to draw reference to McHardy and Donovan's assessment on page 12 of that assessment. It was entitled, How to Provide Affordable Housing in the Caribbean. It was highlighted that in 2050, annual costs from sea level rise and increasing intensity of hurricanes and floods are projected to range from $3.9 million to $6.1 billion for all CARICOM nations, which amounts to about 0.9% to 1.2% of projected GDP. Mr. Speaker, this is not a horror movie. I'm not trying to scare anyone, but these realities are imminent. And Mr. Speaker, in my humble capacity, allow me to also propose, that if we wish for the housing sector to be more sustainable within a short time frame that we have been allotted, I would recommend that we tap into more sustainable housing models. which the youths can take advantage of. As the Honorable Member McDougall mentioned, she expounded on renting private properties, how expensive it is. There is also micro-mortgage model. That's a model we can also tap into. We can also tap into the Antiguan rent-to-own model. And these models can provide, access to new developer-built homes, make urbanization look modern and great. Now, Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the provision of homes, the Honorable Member mentioned that citizens will be made dependent on the government by providing free homes. But it's not only free homes. If he did his research, he would have understood it's not only free homes. The government is also improving the housing finance system. By providing, look at what's going on with the public servants. It's not free homes. Now, Mr. Speaker, efficiency, productivity, and competitiveness are linked. Here's how. Better productivity means increased efficiency, which results in a higher level of competitiveness. And this higher level of competitiveness will take me to the international airport. Now, that's a big one. Mr. Speaker, the question really is why government's expenditure should be focused on the international airports for the next 3 years. And Mr. Speaker, I beg your forgiveness in bearing bad news to this Honorable House. We are not building an international airport. We are building a runway to economic growth. Mr. Speaker, airports are magnets for business and trade. The Honorable Member spoke about exports. Magnets. Mr. Speaker, can we pull it off without incurring debt? Yes, government is looking into other options rather than going down the long road to take loans. And without encroaching on the ambits of the Minister of Tourism, the target projections by 2025 to improve efficiency is forthwith if the international airport is prioritized. In fact, Mr. Speaker, Dominica is not the only island to prioritize upgrades to the international airport. Other fellow CARICOM nations have shifted their focus to this sector to increase competitiveness, and to improve efficiency in the pursuit of economic growth. Mr. Speaker, Guyana focused on airport infrastructure and achieved immense growth. They added nearly 3,000 feet of their runway, and they added a new airport terminal. Look at the government of Trinidad, Mr. Speaker. Spent nearly $200 million on an airport in Tobago. It was stopped because of COVID, but that was their priority. And, Mr. Speaker, St. Vincent and the Grenadines will always be remembered on Tuesday, February 17, 2017, when they flung open the doors of Agile International Airport. Mr. Speaker, this was such a monumental achievement that day is a national day. Mr. Speaker, I can say to this Honorable House that when we fling open the doors of our international airport, if St. Vincent celebrated it with a national day, we'll have a national week. Some sectors were so eloquently listed by the Honorable Lakeya Joseph at the first sitting of which she identified, and I quote, much emphasis should be placed on other sectors, and the other Honorable Member also mentioned the other sectors, health, and so on. Now, and the other Honorable Member went on to agree with the resolution, but raised concerns, yes, about how did we finalize this project to be the priority for the next 3 years. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Member is accurate, These are all essential sectors. Yes, agriculture, health, yes. But Mr. Speaker, permit permit me in my humble capacity to bring some semblance of relief, not with aspirin, but with concrete, practicable justification, which has been successful in other islands, Caribbean islands, just like us. In determining the international airport as a priority focus for the next 3 years was definitely designated following practice application, identification of critical success factors. And Mr. Speaker, I am an avid reader. And one of the methods that I utilized in my preparation for this debate was to really examine our fellow CARICOM nations to see their prioritization plan for economic development. Prioritization plan. And lo and behold, a case study, economic development in St. Vincent and St. Lucia, much mention was made to how St. Vincent prioritized that international airport. And one critical aspect which really caught my attention was economic growth. Critical sectors also included in their privatization plan, also included agro-processing, education for technical and vocational training, among others. And what really stood out was that, albeit the international airport took priority, the linkage is undoubtedly evident in the maintenance, let's say, educating persons who were able to study aircraft maintenance, information technology, even agro-processing, because of the expansive diversification of not just limiting it to the economy and the benefits of an international airport, but trade. The honorable member mentioned that. I'll not go further into it. You'll get the point. Now, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker.
Please, just briefly, please try your very best to refer to members of this honorable house as honorable members. No, you all, you guys, okay?
Much obliged, Mr. Speaker. Okay, so, Mr. Speaker, the important sectors that the honorable member is so concerned about will not be dismissed. Nonetheless, what must be understood is a direct shift focus. It relates to distinct economic benefits which is required to improve efficiency for the next 3 years. And these are generally measured by its contribution to GDP, jobs, tax revenues associated with the sector. But the economic value is much more than that. Talk about civic pride and value. Yes? You know, ensuring people can move freely, ease of access. I mean, Mr. Speaker, this is just something, this is another level. So, Mr. Speaker, if the honorable member is not relieved of the concerns by now, we may need to increase the dosage by reflecting on renewable energy. In an article written by Louis Shiner and Anna for the Hutchins Center on Fiscal and Monetary Policies, it was reported over the past decade, the United States, we're talking about a mega power, experienced slow productive growth and recognized that a decision had to be taken to prioritize policies within a short time, and I use their own words, quicken the pace of productive growth within a short time period. A panel of experts had to decide on factors which would help them determine which sectors need prioritization and why. And they thought about competition, a productive workforce, and my favorite, focus on the low-hanging fruit, which are industries that subtract value from our economy rather than adding to it.
Honorable member, you have 5 more minutes to complete your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, considering these factors and the potential of renewable energy, simply put, our expenditure will decrease because efficiency will be up and it will be much more sustainable. The honorable member spoke on cost reduction, which this means that the business community will be empowered, the youth will be empowered. They are taking over entrepreneurship in Dominica. There will be a sharp increase in business activity, agro-processors. She spoke about manufacturing. These are things that we cry about every day. Complain, complain, complain. And the end result is improved competitiveness for economic growth, employment creation, improved quality of life for us. Let's consider a situation in Trinidad and Tobago. Back in 2017, when they launched a prioritization project to achieve clean energy by 2021, within 4 years, I would be ashamed to question or to be concerned of their methods for finalizing clean energy. Why prioritize clean energy for 4 years? Mr. Speaker, when a country has more affordable energy, consider the benefits that this accrues on its citizenry, on us, the youth, on the business sector, on the national economy as a whole. In fact, sustainable investments in sustainable energy in Dominica have a significant GDP multiplier. And this was highlighted in the special representative of the Secretary General's recent energy guide for all, where every US dollar invested in the transition towards renewable energy, an additional 93 cents US of additional GDP growth above business as usual is expected to occur. Mr. Speaker, I draw finality to my contribution on this national development concern. The honorable member said, let us not make haste. What are we waiting for? For more hurricanes and tropical storms to engulf us and set us back 20 plus years behind? Let us not make haste. I will go forward. He'll go back. Mr. Speaker, I draw finality to my contribution on this national development concern with an emphasis on our justification for focusing on these 3 capital projects, bearing in mind that these may not be the only sectors that need to be addressed. But we are working within a very short time frame, 3 years, to improve efficiency with limited resources. And if you have limited resources, you have to narrow your efforts on what's most important. If there is limited revenue, limited resources, then the government of the day will have to focus its energy on a few items in a short-term period in order to refocus after that period. That is common sense, not economics. And even within the 3-year time frame, the government will ensure proper monitoring and execution of these projects to avoid waste of revenue for exceeding the time limit, because, as we know, a lot of projects go overboard when it's not supposed to. I further advise on the management of managing these projects to complete them on time, and during the process, even, reevaluate to see if additional income could be spent on other capital expenditure areas, which the honorable members are so concerned about. But in the short term, Mr. Speaker, let's focus on what takes priority. Please. It's the same process where families focus on what's important while not negating other areas, but based on the limited resources, these are the areas that require direct focus. Mr. Speaker, the honorable member started off his speech by asking, what is the right thing? This is how I will end. John Meade said, people who focus get things done. People who can prioritize get the right things done. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to move that the House stand suspended until 3 p.m. this afternoon.
Mr. Speaker, I second that. I second that, Mr. Speaker.
It has been moved and seconded that this honorable House stands suspended until 3 p.m. this afternoon. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. This House stands suspended until 3 p.m.